What is a history fact that is so stupid it doesn't seem real? During 1774, Frederick the Great of Prussia had a free potato policy to help the people through the famine. A lot of people initially rejected the potatoes, and so he had guards feign patrol of the potato fields so they looked more valuable and people would steal them in the night. Even though they were totally free, they felt guilty, so they turned themselves in, not knowing it was Free Potato Day. Not one but two kings of France died by smashing their heads on the top part of a door, lintel, close bracket. Charles VIII in 1498, the shock probably caused something else but still. Louis III on the other hand was pursuing a fair lady who was actually trying to escape him on his horse on the 5th of August 882. When she passed a door, the horse went through, not the king, who broke his skull and died instantly. Cornflakes were originally marketed as an anti-masturbation cereal and the man who made them, John Harvey Kellogg, adopted all 8 of his kids and didn't even sleep in the same room as his wife. Just to clarify, it's not just cornflakes. A lot of major bland foods were meant for the same thing, including graham crackers. Graham worked for Kellogg in his sanatorium as a chief psychologist. More people have died from drowning in molasses than being attacked by coyotes. During WWI, Germany converted and armed a passenger cruise liner, the SMS Cap Trafalgar, into a cruiser and sent to the Atlantic Ocean to disrupt British shipping. Off the coast of Brazil though, when they received word that a British ship was coming to flush out German ships disrupting British shipping, the SMS Cap Trafalgar decided to disguise itself as another ocean liner turned cruiser, the HMS Carmania, so that they wouldn't be shot at. The British ship that came to deal with the SMS Cap Trafalgar was the HMS Carmania, which promptly sunk the fake one. Honduras and El Salvador had a 3-day war over a football game. A quote from Winston Churchill, when he was visiting the White House and the president walked in on him buck naked, "The Prime Minister of the UK has nothing to hide from the President of the US. Apostrophe. It's not gay if you had diplomatic immunity. It's not diplomatic if it's not gay." During the Spanish-American War, the Spanish governor of Guam wasn't told about the war. When a US warship showed up he was happy to see them, cause he thought they were just visiting. Boy was he wrong. That must have been awkward for the warship. A prominent Roman politician, Publius Clodius Pulcher, dressed as a woman to infiltrate a woman's only religious ceremony in a futile effort to seduce Julius Caesar's wife. Not surprisingly, his plan didn't work. Charges were pressed and caused a very public legal battle for the next 2 years. At the insistence of his wife, none other than the famous Cicero came to prosecute the case. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Crassus, yes, the same Crassus of the first triumvirate and richest person in Rome at this point, bribed the jury and Pulcher was acquitted. In the meantime, Caesar divorced his wife over the affair. Surprisingly, though, this didn't tank Pulcher's career. Instead, it strengthened his alliance and he became a rather prominent politician. Once he gained more power, he was able to put a law which retroactively applied to Cicero, banishing him from Rome and allowing the state to confiscate or destroy his property. While political enmity was present, much of it was also revenge. This isn't all. He also employed street gangs to dog his bidding. They'd gather at opposing politicians' speeches and heckle them. They'd blockade roads so politicians couldn't make it to an important vote. They'd rough up people they didn't like. Another opposing politician, Milo, didn't care for this up and brought up his own street gangs. The difference was that Milo's gangs were trained by gladiators. General street violence erupted in the streets of Rome. The street violence caused 2 delays to important elections and eventually Milo caused the death of Pulcher in scuffle. When placed on trial, Milo had none other than Cicero, now returned from exile, be his defense lawyer. Despite his best efforts, Milo was exiled. Hold up. You write all that, but somehow leave out the part where Clodius's supporters broke into the Senate house with his body and held the funeral service there. Then they burned the whole thing down around him. So 4 years after the Senate didn't have a meeting house of its own. You know how basically every depiction of Julius Caesar has him getting killed inside the Senate house. didn't actually happen because Rome's Senate didn't have its own building until after Caesar died. They were meeting inside a theater and had been for years. All because Clodius's fans went nuts. A man from New York missed his friends who were fighting in Vietnam. So he traveled thousands of miles to track them down in a combat zone, to personally give them beer and letters from home. He even wrote a book about it called The Greatest Beer Run Ever. This is the best thing ever. I'm envisioning a drunk dude in a Hawaiian shirt with an upside down map walking through the jungle in Vietnam yelling, "Hey, Mickey, George, you guys here? It's Tony." King George II was so constipated while he was taking a crap his heart actually physically burst. Henry VIII ate so little fiber that he needed a doctor specializing in enemas so he can poop. George IV basically ate himself to death. He had such bad gout from a lifetime of indulging in meat and wine that by the end of his life, he needed 100 drops of laudanum to get him through breakfast. Dude eventually shat himself to death after a violent bowel movement caused a massive intestinal bleed. While we are at it, Edmund II of England died on the toilet when an assassin stabbed him in the butt from the under the latrine pit he was sitting on. King Jing of Jin, spring and autumn period, China, accidentally walked into the open air cesspit of a toilet and drowned. I'm impressed at how well versed you are on this topic. A NASA weather satellite's guidance system was failing and ended up crash landing in Australia. Instead of giving the satellite back, NASA was charged with a $500 littering fine. After the fine was paid, NASA wanted to put the satellite in a museum, but was refused on the basis that, since the satellite fell from space, it's legally Australia's now. So now, NASA pays a monthly rent to Australia to display its own satellite in a museum. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel, but turned it down. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4, 1826. John Adams' last words were "Thomas Jefferson still lives," unaware that he was already dead when he said it. The sixth president had a pet alligator and Ryan Reynolds failed drama CL but Adolf Hitler had many physical ailments, many of which are known. He had in particular severe stomach cramps and also bouts of insomnia, so his quack doctor, Theodor Morell, in his infinite wisdom, gave Hitler sleeping pills and laxative, resulting in very severe gas problems. The guy that my username was named after, King Alfred, pushed back the invading Viking armies and then revolutionized the educational system, social system, legal system and like a dozen other things. There's a reason he's called Alfred the Great. He was also very famously yelled at by an old lady because he was too busy plotting a military campaign to watch the cakes that she had in the oven. I just find it silly that one of the greatest monarchs in English history was yelled at by an old lady for the same kinds of trivial things that people have been angry at each other over forever. It's an odd juxtaposition. Gorilla gorilla gorilla. This is the scientific name of the western lowland gorilla. I'm a third grade teacher and I had my kids pick an animal to do an endangered animal report on. One of them chose the western lowland gorilla, and when I saw the scientific name he had wrote, I tried to explain how to find the correct one. That is, until I got to that part of the webpage and saw it really was gorilla gorilla gorilla. I burst out laughing, apologized and congratulated him on finding the scientific name all by himself. It was the best. William Henry Harrison was elected president. The day of his inauguration it was rainy and cold, and he didn't wear a hat or a coat, thereby thumbing his nose at moms everywhere. Then later he died of pneumonia. 31 days in office. Back in like elementary school, my school had become a famous Ohioan day where everyone in the 4th grade would become a famous Ohioan for a few hours in the gym and the other classes would come by and I'd give a little speech. Naturally I chose William Henry Harrison and there wasn't much to talk about other than his name. Shortly before the U.S. Civil War, abolition was such a heated topic that due to it on one occasion a congressman brought a cane to Congress and beat another politician with it. Bill Clinton, who hasn't been president in 20 years, is 4 years younger than Joe Biden. Trump, GWB and Bill Clinton were all born in the same year within 3 months of each other. There has also never been a US president born in the 1950s. How about the fact that all the presidents were somehow linked familiarly to King John of England, even Obama and Trump, except one priest or two? In WW2 the Russians trained dogs to run under tanks with time bombs on their backs. Anti-tank dogs. But the Russians trained the dogs on Russian tanks, so when they set them free on the battlefield they tuned around and started blowing up the Russian tanks instead of the opposition's tanks. Teddy Roosevelt invented the forward P butt in American football. Just off the top of my head. 1. King Henry I died from eating a giant plate of lampreys, a type of small eel, too fast. 2. Then American Vice President Andrew Johnson was so drunk at his vice presidential inauguration that he could not swear the new Congress in and rambled incoherently during his acceptance speech. 3. Pope Stephen VI put the month's dead corpse of Pope Formosus on trial for crimes against the papacy, serving as a bishop without being appointed to the clergy, and a couple of other crimes. 2. He was dug up, propped up in a chair, and a deacon was made to stand behind the body and speak for him. Formosus was found guilty and punished by having his fingers chopped off and buried in an unmarked grave, but the conviction was annulled by a later pope and reinstated by one of that pope's successors. I believe Formosus is still considered guilty. 4. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war on Poseidon and had his soldiers fight with the waves and collect conch shells as proof of their victory. How the Berlin Wall fell. In order to calm mounting protests, GDR officials decided on loosening travel restrictions between East and West, not open the border completely. Notes of the new rules had been handed to a spokesman who hadn't had time to read them before the press conference. Private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites, he said. Surprised journalists clamored for more details. Shuffling through his notes, he said that as far as he was aware, it was effective immediately. In fact, it had been planned to start the next day, with details on applying for a visa. But the news was all over television, and East Germans flocked to the border in huge numbers, as the border became inundated with East Berliners wishing to reunite with family and or escape the GDR. Border guards became overwhelmed, and with no orders to either shoot upon the crowd or open the gate, only a handful of guards facing hundreds and thousands of citizens, rather than fire and create a stampede and potentially kill hundreds, the head of the guards decided to give the order, open the barrier. What came next was a spontaneous chain reaction, with Berliners on both sides arriving at Checkpoint Charlie to celebrate this momentous event and to demolish the wall. So basically an ill-prepared functionary made a flippant remark, and a border guard captain, unable to get orders on how to proceed, led to one of the most defining moments of the late 20th century in Europe. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on Neptune and ordered his men to stab the sea. After that, he collected the seashells as war spoils. The fax machine predates the American Civil War, and Nevada sent their whole constitution, which is the one still in use today, to DC via telegraph a week before the 1864 election at a cost of the equivalent of over $70,000 in today's dollars, just to give Lincoln a 3-vote bump in the Electoral College, which he didn't need anyway. Everything Olga of Kiev did after her husband was killed by an opposing tribe. The opposing tribe killed him by tying his legs to trees they'd bent down and then releasing the trees. Cliffs. Buried 20 men alive, burning another 20 alive after she lured them into a bathhouse. Slaughtered 5,000 of the opposing tribe soldiers after she'd gotten them pissed drunk, telling the opposing tribe she'd end the assaults if each house gave her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. She then had her soldiers tie offer to each of the birds and set them free so that they would return home to nest in their original villages. Eventually the villagers' bedtime fires would ignite the sulfur and burn the town to the ground. Also, she's a saint in the Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church. Not only did Australia lose its 17th Prime Minister at the beach, he drowned, but we named a public swimming pool after him. There is at least one person, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who survived both atomic bombs. I don't know if this is incredibly good luck or incredibly bad luck. According to some sources, he was in the middle of describing the Hiroshima bombing when the Nagasaki bomb went off only a few kilometers away. People used to think women's uterus would go flying if they rode the train. and fall out if they ran marathons. The world's first submarine attack took place September 6, 1776 during the American Revolution. The craft was called the Turtle, and was essentially a giant oak and metal Christmas ornament powered by two hand-cranked propellers. It was designed to attach waterproofed explosives to the hulls of British warships. However, the pilot kept hitting metal plating when trying to attach the bomb, and abandoned the mission due to dwindling air supply. All subsequent missions were failures as well, and eventually the ship transporting the Turtle was sunk with the vessel on board. Also, during WW2, Americans tried to develop pigeon-guided missiles. The idea was that they would be guided by a pigeon inside the missile, pecking at the target, visible through a windshield in the missile. All the simulation tests proved it could be done, but sadly Project Pigeon, as it was called, was never given the funding it needed to become a reality. Live pigs were hung for battlements as a defense against siege elephants. Liechtenstein went to war with 80 people and came back with 81. The way the world is today, and an immense portion of its problems can be traced back to one 19-year-old kid shooting an archduke in 1914. I grant you this is true, and really that assassination plan was doomed to fail until the archduke's driver took a wrong turn and the assassin happened upon them. But in reality some other event would have sparked the powder keg sooner or later. The wrong turn was the second attempt of the day. The archduke survived the first attempt and dropped off the wounded. Then he went back the same way he came and died. He could have lived if he just stayed put after the first attempt. Jesse Owens, who I believe was the first African American Olympic gold medalist, won at the 1936 Games in Berlin, where the Nazis were in control, came home to the US, only to face Jim Crow laws and a bunch of other awful racial discrimination, including being snubbed by the president. Australia lost a war against emus. In Australia's defense, nobody has ever won a war against the emus, but the fact that Australia tried a war with them is stupid. The Titanic lookouts did not have binoculars. It was believed they had accidentally been left in Southampton, but they were locked in a safe on board. It's better than that. The binoculars were in a locked locker on board and everyone knew it. The keys were accidentally taken by a guy who got transferred to another ship a week earlier. Carrots don't actually help improve eyesight. It was a lie made up by the British during WWII to hide their radar technology and explain how British pilots always knew where the Germans were coming from. Rudy Giuliani's press conference outside a landscaping business between a sex shop and a crematorium. A woman named Violet Jessop survived not only the sinking of the Titanic, but also the destruction of both of the Titanic's sister ships. That the war between Zanzibar and Britain lasted for only 38 minutes. It's the shortest recorded war in history. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.